Welcome and thanks for joining us this evening for this online gallery tour and in conversation with Carmen Argote. I'm Nicky Russell, the Director of Primary, and as a visual description, I am a white man with a shaved head and spectacles and a black shirt buttoned up to the neck. And this is Jade Foster.
Hi, and as a visual description, I'm a black person, I use they, them pronouns. I've got a velvet and red and blue blazer, a black jumper, and I'm currently in the project space.
And together we'll host this event here at Primary this evening with Carmen Argote joining us from LA. For those unfamiliar with Primary, we are a visual arts contemporary space and we provide studios and residencies and offer a public programme of exhibitions and events, and we're located in Nottingham in the UK. This event is held in conjunction with Carmen's first solo exhibition in the UK, Beloved, which is on from the 24th of September to the 11th of December and comprises video, sculpture and works on paper. The format of the event this evening is that, first of all, we'll share a short gallery walkthrough for those who haven't had a chance to visit the exhibition. And then myself and Jade will be in conversation with Carmen, exploring the kind of wider context for the project. And finally, we will open up for questions from yourselves. So if you have any questions throughout the evening, enter those into the YouTube chat, and either myself or Jade will add those, ask those questions to Carmen towards the end.
Yeah, and just some housekeeping rules. So my colleague Colette will be putting the code of conduct into the chat, so please do read that through. And we ask that in sharing the space that you respect other people, and also would like to just talk a little bit about the intention of the event. So as a kind of public process, we're welcoming Carmen and myself and Nikki to kind of reflect and to talk through, and we really felt it was important to bring people into that space and into that process to reflect with us. And it's a time for introspection, it's a time to think about the kind of layered process, that kind of found transformation and a kind of metamorphosis, I like to call, through slowness, engaging both Los Angeles and Nottingham, but also looking at the kind of institutional response to COVID, as well as the artists kind of responding to that maybe quite peculiar pace of the project. So thank you for joining us, and we're going to go through into the gallery walkthrough.
We said we were going to do a short gallery walkthrough, particularly thinking about people who haven't had a chance to see the exhibition, to give them a glimpse of what Carmen's exhibition in space is like. Perhaps even kind of people that haven't ever been to kind of Primary, so maybe to say something quickly about a Primary as a kind of space. You know, we're located within a former Victorian school building, and Carmen's exhibition is situated in what was the kind of former school hall. So it has a particular architectural kind of feel to it, the kind of high vaulted ceiling and the sash windows that run down multiple sides of the space that give it a kind of a certain atmosphere before you even start to kind of bring work into the space. And to kind of summarize the kind of different components or kind of elements in the room, I guess the video acts as this kind of backing for the kind of exhibition in a way. It's kind of doubled both across the kind of projected image, across the kind of architecture of the space, and also kind of simultaneously kind of repeated on the kind of screen on the floor. And then as you kind of turn around, looking back down the kind of room, obviously you have these kind of 3 kind of large scale kind of works on paper. And that kind of you're drawn into in relation to, what kind of processes those works have kind of gone through in a way.
Yes, and the works are called Evergreen Hopscotch 1, 2, and 3. They include bodily fluids, crayons, tannic acid, urine, detritus, and other materials as well. And I think this layering is almost like Carmen being turned inside out and externalizing things that are quite internal. And almost that the body is a continued motif. Not only the kind of absence of the body, but the presence of it. So the hat that also Carmen wore in the film, there's a relationship between that. There's also a continuous relationship with the color red and the kind of rubbings that are used within the film and its correlation to the drawings. Within the second drawing in the middle, there's a hopscotch repetitive drawing and rubbing, which is the hopscotch in primary playground. And also the bodies feel like they're being engrossed by this texture and they're being weighed down and they're being kind of encapsulated by various kind of materials.
And it's also like almost like the kind of the remainder or the markings of a kind of body, rather than the physical sculptural qualities of a body, that the body has left this kind of imprint on the kind of paper in some way.
And also it's quite interesting the scale of the works. They go through the whole gallery, and it also feels very engrossing and all-encompassing. And I think this flattening and this presentation, this horizontal presentation, reflects to Carmen's process of being in a cemetery and filming, and particularly a reference to potentially burial sites or burial as a concept. And also this quite flattening of the kind of surface, I think, relates to her kind of previous works and potential process as well.
And it's probably kind of interesting to kind of comment on the kind of duration of the works kind of making. So whilst we're kind of talking about these kind of works on paper, these were actually the kind of the last elements to be made physically whilst here at kind of primary, where the actual duration of the exhibition's making was over a number of years. So Carmen undertook that site visit to Nottingham back in 2019. And we were kind of at that stage planning for a physical residency here at primary in 2020, which COVID made impossible. And therefore there was a switch to this remote residency where Carmen was making work in LA, and we were meeting up online to talk about how that was progressing, but also what the relationship was between LA and the spaces that she'd encountered here in Nottingham. So while she was here in Nottingham, there was this kind of interest in this kind of walking through the kind of various cemetery spaces that exist in Nottingham. And then when located in LA, almost kind of transplanting that in a way by then beginning to kind of repeatedly visit the kind of Evergreen Cemetery in LA, which kind of led on to taking rubbings of those kind of gravestones, focusing on the word mother within those gravestones, but also the way that process of rubbing, that process of walking, that process of being in the cemetery becomes kind of like a ritualized kind of action that Carmen was kind of going through, which kind of led on to that kind of interest in beginning to film that, to think about that as a kind of video work. I guess a kind of witnessing of Carmen's ritualized actions, or a documenting of this process within the cemetery, and a way of doing that in collaboration with others. So working with Craig on the kind of filming within the cemetery, but also working with Reese here in Nottingham on the kind of editing of that footage, thinking about what elements of that kind of long presence within the cemetery is kind of witnessed through the kind of video that's shared with the public, so that you move away from that kind of linear narrative of kind of a journey through the cemetery to something that feels far more kind of fragmented and provides quite a I think, quite an odd video space to kind of enter into, and how that perhaps kind of spills out into the kind of gallery installation. So the way that the projected image is not on a kind of screen, but kind of wraps around the kind of architecture of the building, and that there's a kind of doubling of that kind of image. So the same video is seen simultaneously across these two surfaces, but also kind of how that, I guess, kind of how that plays around with your kind of position within the work.
Yeah, and the fact that we're a part of the work, and how Carmen has forced us to become part of the work, that we become included within this projected image. And it, you know, the fact that she's life-sized, it feels like we are there with her. It feels like we are witnessing, but we're also part of this particular ritual. It feels like we're following her and we're trailing what she's doing very closely and intimately. And it feels like we've got quite close proximity to the artist. And I think that there's a level of self-awareness of your own body within the space, and also awareness of your kind of interaction with the work itself.
Yeah, so kind of how you're in the work in a way, but it's also probably important to kind of note for somebody unfamiliar with the exhibition that our experience of the work now is dictated by the kind of time that we're encountering it. So, you know, we're stood in the exhibition space kind of late afternoon, where the kind of sun has set, and therefore the projected image is very, very kind of dominant within the space. But there is that kind of durational kind of aspect to that experience of the exhibition. So if you were to come in the kind of morning, you would have the kind of sun coming through the kind of windows, casting this kind of shadow of the windows across the kind of drawings, and kind of bleeding out the kind of projected image. So the kind of drawings take dominance from the kind of projection, and then as the day kind of progresses, there's that kind of transition between the two to this kind of point that we're in now, whereby, you know, the drawings are only kind of lit by this kind of flickering kind of light from the kind of projection. So there is that real kind of, I guess when you arrive at the exhibition gives you a very different kind of experience of what the exhibition is, and that was quite intentional in that kind of installation, that we particularly chose not to kind of black out the space, but have that kind of to and fro between the kind of natural light coming through the windows versus the kind of projected light. Yeah. But yeah. Perhaps that's a good place to end the gallery walkthrough and move over into asking Carmen some questions about some of the things that we don't quite understand.
Yeah.
So now we welcome Carmen to the conversation. So to read out Carmen's bio, Carmen was born in Guadalajara, Mexico, and now lives in LA. They're a multidisciplinary artist who works through the act of inhabiting spaces. Carmen's work is a conversation with the site. She is working from often pointing to the body, to class, and to economic structures in relation to architecture and to its personal history. So welcome, Carmen. How are you doing?
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Jade. I'm doing well. Hello, everyone. And I'm joining you from Los Angeles, California. I am a Latinx person with short, slightly curly black hair, and I'm wearing a khaki jumpsuit. I want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm joining you from occupied territory on the indigenous land of the Tongva and Gabrielino tribe, who continue today to be stewards of this land. And I feel very grateful to be able to be in relationship with the land and acknowledge its history and layers, past and present. So I'm doing well. I'm holding my comfort object and ready for our conversation.
Okay, so kind of following on from the gallery walkthrough, I thought it might be useful to kind of start with a little bit of kind of context, thinking about the kind of journey that we've been on over the last kind of 2-3 years. So you undertook that site visit in 2019, and at that particular point in time, we were imagining that you would undertake this lengthy physical residency in Nottingham in 2020, and then obviously kind of COVID began, and we had to kind of switch that around and think about it as a kind of online residency with uncertainty around what the kind of outcomes might be. And I kind of wonder whether you might want to kind of expand a little bit on that kind of journey for you in terms of how your thinking shifted from that kind of point of being here in Nottingham, kind of seeing Nottingham for the first time, seeing primary for the first time, through to that kind of shift in kind of thinking around how you were going to make work for the project that we were working together on.
I think that what really comes forward to me is the relationship between you and I, and how it's been sort of this conversation, this back and forth, starting from your visit in Los Angeles and me learning about the space through our conversations, and then shifting into this other way of almost like our bi-weekly check-ins as the process or the residency kind of went along, and allowing the space for almost like an incubation and reflection to happen and to transform the work in parallel to let's say like my own transformations, both within the self and then also within the context of the changing life world around us. So and allowing that to kind of converse, to grow the work from that place.
And I guess the kind of work went through quite a number of kind of different phases in terms of when you were kind of first here, this kind of, as we kind of touched on in the kind of gallery walkthrough, this idea of spending time, passing through, moving through these kind of cemetery spaces. And I was kind of wondering, what was it about that kind of stood out to you during this kind of visit? And then how did that transfer to the spaces that you were kind of beginning to encounter in LA when you couldn't return to Nottingham?
Yeah, I feel like it's a trusting of these connections, so that the cemetery near primary almost like offered like a notice that this is here. And then when it coincided, so this idea of coincidence, right? It coincided with a move into the neighborhood of Boyle Heights for myself, and that there was a cemetery in close proximity, and sort of starting to visit this cemetery as almost like a site of refuge for me at the beginning, and then noticing the word mother, and then sort of trusting these kind of two presences, like these, that there was some meaning, like a meaningful coincidence, and following that kind of thread of a searching process, perhaps. And in the rubbing, it said mother, her, other. So as I was rubbing the word mother, the word her, and the word other, kind of pointed me to a deeper reflection of both, like, okay, like, both generationally, like inward, like whose mother? Are we all mothers if we create? And really shaping this body of work, which Beloved is a part of, I would say. Yeah.
And do you know what it was about the kind of the seeing that kind of word within the kind of gravestones that kind of led to that decision to begin to start to take those kind of rubbings? Is that something that's kind of a recurring feature within your work leading into that, or is that something kind of new that's specifically related to kind of seeing that in those kind of walks through the cemetery?
It wasn't planned, and it's not like something that I don't think about it in terms of, oh, this is something that I do. It's almost like, again, it's like a mirroring, like, oh, this is showing me this. How am I taking this in? Okay, I'm going to go to the cemetery and, do these rubbings. And then it was, I'm going to go to the cemetery, to Evergreen Cemetery, and do these actions. And then it was like, okay, I want to be able to capture these actions. So then maybe there's a film or some kind of video, not a film, but like some sort of video work. And that kind of starts growing out the conversation. And then during the editing, it was like, okay, what am I looking at? What is it showing me? So this constant back and forth that parallels almost like an inner questioning that's always in dialogue with maybe like there is no distinction between like the inside questioning and the outside questioning, and just allowing that negative space to really I don't know, to like come forward in the work, and trusting that.
And do you think there was something about that attempting to find that kind of exteriority in terms of kind of leading to kind of introducing this person with a camera into the equation, that thing about being in the cemetery on your own and not being able to get outside yourself to look in from the kind of outside? Was that what kind of prompted the kind of introduction of the video camera, or was there something else about that time in the cemetery that kind of led on to kind of thinking that you wanted that kind of external eye to be kind of witnessing what you were doing? Yeah, what was it that kind of prompted the kind of need to kind of have the camera? Was it a need, or was it kind of, was it more kind of structured than that in terms of already thinking about kind of the work? Was it, what brought the kind of camera into that space?
I like that question. Thanks, Nikki. That's a good question. I feel like I unconsciously knew, but I didn't know exactly why. I knew that I wanted to do these actions. I knew that I wanted to ask Craig to be a part of it, because there was a okay, like, I trust this relationship. Craig, being my ex-partner, was like, there was like a certain kind of like comfort and safety, but also I think unconsciously there was a search for reflection. And so I needed that other. And again, going to this like idea of like mother, her, other, this kind of like distancing coming towards. And I wouldn't say that it was planned, but then I only was able to recognize that after I saw the footage and became more interested in not the sort of documentation of the actions, but more interested in the spaces between, in the sort of dynamics between, like the dynamics of the filming, like the stand over here, come closer, like these kind of like relationships of direction and control. And that became that allowed me to see those structures that are more unconscious in relationship with another. And so then that guided me in terms of what the artwork was about. I kind of went into it as a search, not knowing what the artwork was about, but trusting in the process. And then there's something that I knew, but it was unconscious, that I was able to recognize when I saw it in the medium of the moving image. Then at that point, then I could work with Reese to try to almost like bring that into focus.
And I'm really interested to know your use of crayons and where that derives from. Like, why crayons? Why red? Why use that as a material? Why bring that into the process? What's your thinking around that?
Mm-hmm. Crayons for me is I go back to the action of something very that's rooted in my developmental processing, something very, hand and like immediate. I also think about the floor and surface, like drawing with crayons on the floor, this kind of this play space, psychological play space of being a child and having that place to kind of search with a material or a tool, in this case a crayon. And so I wanted to use that. Maybe it was for me like a, with this tool, would this make it easier to access this play space of childhood, and it seemed to be able to kind of work for me. It surprised me. It kept me interested, and it kept it almost allowed me to be both that child and myself with this material. And the red, and then the crayon melts with the sun and it becomes a strawberry. And so it was kind of like this thing that I thought I knew that I didn't know, that was showing me new ways of being. And I think that parallels my search.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely something in that in relation to the kind of metamorphosis that you see, the kind of the material quality of the crayon go through in the kind of video, in relation to perhaps kind of a kind of metamorphosis of the kind of the individual involved as well, in terms of how you change through the kind of process of kind of making the work. So there's some kind of correlation between the kind of materiality of the crayon, when you kind of like, you're squashing it in that kind of melted form and kind of creating, I guess it becomes that you're both drawing with the crayon, but you're also kind of sculpting with it in a way, and forming these kind of new shapes which become something else in the video. Do you see that in relation to that kind of the element of the kind of, between the kind of the changing form of the crayon versus the changing form of the person kind of undertaking the kind of work?
Yeah, it's yes, I do. It's like this, and it's also this. It's both. The crayon surprises me, and the process of seeing myself in relationship on video surprises me, and the art holds that space for me to be able to reflect on that aspect, or like to hold that space. We can say it's for both to be, so when I saw myself in the video, I was like, oh, that's me, and it's also not me. There's like an othering in the same way that the crayon is a tool for drawing. It's a tool for going back in time to when I was a child. It's a tool to almost like say like, oh, this is like the floor. It's a tool for rubbing, and it's also a strawberry. It's also like this material that's malleable. It's also wax. It's also red. it's also like these, like, and it's all of it at once. So it's, yeah, going into that space where things are more than one thing, and there's room for all of that.
And do you think that there is a kind of a recurring movement in terms of that the work is not just located within the cemetery, but there is a kind of a shifting to kind of other spaces in terms of whether that is to a kind of a memory in terms of a kind of childhood space, but there's also a kind of moment within the video where you're almost kind of talking about you kind of leaving your body and entering into the body of another animal. So this kind of shifting into kind of different spaces is the process, are the rituals means to kind of, I guess, kind of move between spaces, kind of that it's not completely physically located in the cemetery, but there is this movement back and forth to kind of other spaces.
I feel like that connects to this idea of not really demarcating art and life, not really demarcating the cemetery as a separate place than, you know, neighborhood, than the places that I go. I mean, the embodying of the coyote eating the bird, you know, this particular cemetery has like a running track around it. And so during the process of visiting the cemetery, pretty much almost on a daily basis, walking around it, whether I would go inside or outside, but really it was like that was an experience that I had while jogging around the cemetery. And it's also in a way like at the same time a way of like sort of processing, and at that moment when I retold it, kind of reliving it, and this sort of blurring between boundaries. I don't know if I answered that question exactly.
Yeah, I guess kind of, I guess when we rewatch that kind of element of the footage, that kind of, you know, that decision to really kind of focus in on that kind of element, it seems quite a, you know, there's a moment where it kind of feels quite kind of grounded, and then that moment in the film really kind of switches things around, where it's kind of all of a sudden it's no longer about being physically on the ground rubbing away at this surface. It's about kind of entering this kind of other space, which I think is kind of what I was kind of talking about in the gallery walkthrough, which is, I think, both within the video, but also in terms of the way that it's been installed, there is this quite curious space that is kind of non-physical that you can kind of enter into if you engage with the work in that way. I don't know whether that's intentional or kind of whether you would kind of agree with that as a kind of perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in working with you and Reese, when we were working on the editing and seeing that moment and saying, okay, it goes from landscape, maybe exterior, and at that moment, you're right, it does switch into the interior, and then it goes, and then it when it almost like reintroduces again, the work kind of starts again with the close up of my shirt and the strawberry. Now it's this other the like landscape of the interior space. So there's this kind of shifting. That's a really interesting observation. Again, I think a lot of these things are they might be unconscious, but they're recognized. And I think that's the interesting thing about art, that you don't need to know all the answers, but it's known. And so that experience allows us to kind of like, you know, bring forward those things that are activating those moments for us, even though like I can't say, oh, like I filmed like that was filmed by chance. You know, I wasn't directing Craig to film when he was filming that section, and it was in the editing that I was able to say, wow, I remember that. It was in between these actions that I was doing. And this is where it kind of parallels the space that I'm in when I'm doing those actions, and simply capturing the action might not bring that energy forward, but in the moving image, this in between space somehow captured that image. So let's bring that, or like that energy. So let's bring that energy and then, make it part of the work.
I'm interested to know a little bit about when you came to primary and what your process was in terms of engaging with the spaces here. You know, visiting the cemetery, going to primary's playground, because there's something really interesting about what happens when you deal with unfamiliarity and the process of that. Does your process change when you're not familiar with a particular location, or when you're situated somewhere that's not necessarily somewhere that's your immediate environment or what you're kind of used to? Does your kind of process of making work shift? And I'm just really interested to know a little bit more about your process here and what you were kind of doing here.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was an intention, and fill any gaps that I might forget, Nikki. But like the idea originally was that I was going to go there and I was going to have this film that was finished, kind of going on, and I was going to converse in that in the sort of gallery space, and then I was going to make the work sort of with this film kind of playing and converse, and I was going to see what happened. And I remember I got there and I was very, there was the intention to go and visit the cemetery, but the more I did and I tried, the more I kind of came inward, and that manifested itself in kind of staying inside the yard, like the schoolyard, like the primary campus, and really kind of going into this hopscotch that was on the playground. And I've been thinking about, like this, there was like this wanting of, to make a rubbing of this hopscotch. There was some kind of searching on this hopscotch. A lot of times these obsessions, I don't know exactly why, I don't understand them in from the start, but I trust that there's something interesting that it's holding for me, so I follow that. And I feel like in a way that was that like repetition of rubbing those numbers, like searching for perhaps some like, are these new structures, is this a way of like, this seems to be an entry point. It's a doorway for me to kind of get somewhere that's in conversation with the work. And so after rubbing this hopscotch and layering, I mean, who knows, it might have been like an incubation period, or like just some kind of processing, or numbers, some kind of, other language, or some kind of way to order something that was hard for me to put into order. And then being able to bring those drawings up into the space and have them converse with the video, and then understand that they're in many ways an extension of this landscape. That was sort of realized on site. I didn't know that going in. So that was a surprise too, a surprise that I enjoyed. and then seeing like, okay, like in this big, tall gallery, it's surprising to me that the work is on the floor. In this big, tall gallery, it's surprising that there's like nothing really on the walls, that there's that, you know, I'm going for the moving image in relationship to these drawings that are on the floor, this vertical and horizontal again coming into the work, and then this time like these almost like figures, bodies, umbilical cord, almost like sculpture, connecting the image to the rubbing. And in a way, like the hopscotch is right outside the yard, so like perhaps also connecting the inside to the outside. That kind of interior exterior conversation.
I've got a question for both of you actually. And you did talk about you enjoying the process, and the way that I kind of work as a curator sometimes is about emotion and it's about the feel of a process. So I've got a question for both of you really, and much about this is about the relationship between the curator and the artist, but also your relationship to the process. So how did the process or journey feel for you both, in terms of your shared maybe feelings, or but also individually, Carmen, when you were working, how did it feel for you? And also Nikki, working with Carmen, or even just thinking about the work, how did that feel for you?
Do you want me to start, Carmen?
Yeah, please start, Nikki.
So I don't have a fully formed kind of answer to it, but I guess the initial thing that I'm thinking about is that it's almost a kind of accentuated version of the way that primary works with artists anyway, in the sense that we undertake a kind of commissioning process. So usually the work is developed through conversation. So along the kind of journey of making work, we're in kind of ongoing conversation about what the work is. So I guess that as you've described it as a kind of searching kind of process is usually an approach we would go through. But I guess what was unusual in this instance was the kind of elongation of that kind of process, and also the not knowing what the kind of end point was right up until the kind of last minute. So, as you kind of pointed to, we were checking in via kind of Zoom to have conversations every few weeks to talk about what was happening. But there was a fairly relaxed approach to what those conversations were, in the sense that we were just talking about what you were making in the studio and what you were doing at that particular moment in time, because we didn't yet kind of have a definitive kind of end point to it. So it created quite a open space for kind of conversation and for making work, which probably had this sense of opening up the funnel of what the working process is. And usually in a project, we know that we need to start to kind of narrow it in, but there was an allowance for opening up quite far within the kind of process would be something that I would kind of pick up on, and I don't know whether that kind of that worked for you as a kind of way of kind of working, whether that's something that you've experienced before or whether it's particular to this kind of project.
Yeah, I want to say that I really felt trusted. I felt very safe to be in the unknown, or as safe as that can feel. I was safe in the discomfort, per se, of the unknown. And in a way, it was a process that really taught me that I could be fully invested and care about the work, and at the same time, take time to allow the work to take form. And trust that it was going to build complexity, not because it was elongated, but because I was allowing the process to really develop, and not trying to perhaps like control. Like I never felt like, okay, like this has got to like, there's only the pressure that I would put on myself, but then there was enough. I knew that I could always count on Nikki to be like, it's gonna be okay, like let's talk about like our walking and like, like it's there was like like you were there for me in that way. So thank you so much. And
I guess there was, I guess there was a kind of brief moment where we were just kind of mirroring each other in certain ways, whereby you were saying you were doing this thing in LA, and could I do the same thing here in the UK, because you didn't have physical access to those spaces. And I guess you then get these kind of different ways of documenting and sharing that information. And I'm not quite sure where some of those things went, but it seemed like we were in a kind of joint process of kind of thinking about how we kind of made the work when the kind of the initial approach was kind of taken away from us in a way. So it did feel, quite a kind of collaborative kind of space at that moment in time, but also I guess one of the enjoyable things about the kind of process in terms of kind of checking in with you every few weeks is that every time I speak to you, there's something different going on in your kind of background. So whilst we were talking about elements of the project, there was also all of these new things that were emerging every time we kind of spoke. So being able to see these things in the background and have that conversation around, I guess, kind of the expanding nature of the kind of overall project and the things that you were kind of working on.
And I remember, Carmen, when we spoke after your residency, the opening, and you just, I think it was a kind of like moment, like an exhale moment, like this process, you were telling me this process was just spewing. There's a lot of things that were just there, and it's like coming out. And I remember you kind of telling me, it's all coming out, right? It's all spewing out. It's all kind of just being all this stuff that's been kind of dredged up, shall we say? And there's something quite therapeutic about that. This idea of like exhaling after the process. Did it feel like that for you on reflection now? Does it feel like there was a lot of things that you kind of had that you were just like needing to kind of come up or needing to kind of to be surfaced, if that makes sense?
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, both with the work that was made on site at Primary and with the video work. I think when I went to Evergreen Cemetery to do the actions, it was very much in that, like, this needs to come out, this action needs to happen. Let me, like, get this like cake and, like, put it on and let me, like this kind of searching, these rubbings, these repetitions that somehow, and then it was in the editing that I could be like, oh, okay, whoa, I'm seeing this with a different eye, like taking a different positioning, like being a viewer, being being in that delirium, of making, digging, and then being able to, okay. And then with the rubbings, it was very much, again, like, why am I rubbing this hopscotch? But I remember, like, there were meetings going on around me. People were eating their lunch. People were walking by, baby stroller, and I'm just rubbing and rubbing and rubbing this hopscotch and these big rolls of paper. Somehow, that was an action as well, and in a way, perhaps the action or the documentation of that action is captured on the paper. And I remember there was this part where I started taking one of those big rolls of paper and braiding and making that umbilical cord. And it was that this idea of like these objects on top of these hopscotch rubbings that created the almost like I don't want to say bridge, but the connection of, oh, like this is actually an extension of this landscape, the inner landscape, the interior and the exterior, like Nottingham here, the present moment, and then like where I was and where I am, this kind of back and forth with those sculptural elements. And then that gave rise to these comfort objects that are also kind of inhabiting like little parts, like little, like, okay, these are like the new, like, outbursts of the ideas that are going to grow into, or continue the conversation on.
I'm interested to why large scale, because there's a lot of people that work, in short kind of bursts, in a very kind of short scale, in kind of small scale, intimate ways. But why large scale? Why is the video so large and presented so large? Why are the drawings large scale? What is that? Why that choice, if that's a conscious one?
I think that with scale, I don't usually enter it with this idea of large scale. It's almost like the scale of the body or 1-to-1. So the video, what I loved is that the shadow of a person could be the same scale as me walking around the cemetery. Like there was a 1-to-1 relationship, like the size of the person viewing the work, in moments in the video. And it's also in conversation with the architecture. I guess it has to do with architecture, both psychological architecture, and physical. And then the hopscotch, well, it's like that's the scale of the hopscotch. Like if it's not that scale, you can't like really jump, or imagine yourself jumping or make those connections. So it needs to be that scale. It's a 1-to-1. Yeah.
Maybe just to kind of jump back slightly, in a number of your answers you talked about kind of editing, and I guess I'm kind of interested in editing in multiple senses in relation to the work. So there feels like there's a kind of, within the project as it's kind of developed, there's been a lot of editing out. So there's a lot of things produced that then are not visible necessarily within the project. So both within the video. So in the video, there was lots and lots of kind of footage of all of these actions undertaken within the cemetery. And as you've already commented on, in the end, all of those, what could be seen as the kind of main sections or the actions, were edited out to focus in on these kind of in-between kind of moments. But also to kind of tie that into the approach to the exhibition as well. When we talked about you coming to Primary to install, we briefly talked about what elements of the work that you'd made in LA might be kind of brought with you. So we talked about shipping work over and installing that work that had been made across that kind of 12 to 18 months. And then there was a moment just before where we decided, no, it's not right to bring any of that element. So everything that had been made physically over that period of time was left in LA, and work was made anew within the space. So I kind of wonder whether that kind of editing process is a kind of normal one within the way that you work, and what happens to all of those things that aren't seen, in terms of, are they gone for good, or are they kind of brought back into the kind of project at some later point?
I love that question. It's awesome. Oh my gosh, there's so many things. There's so many things. I mean, well, there's this idea of this almost like this bigger, larger, not bigger, like this body of work called Mother, of which Beloved is, let's call it like an edit of, or like a section of. It's like being held. And there's for like 12 to 18 months, maybe more, I've been constantly making work in this searching process. So it is kind of like that dog digging. And I love, like my friend Hamza Walker said, that it's like my process is like this dog digging, and all the dirt that is getting kicked up is these different artworks or these different material, or maybe like video material, photograph, drawings, all these things. And it's the process of searching that's the body of work. So I love that. They're not, like I would say, gone for good. They're going to be brought back, at some point. And again, I trust that. I don't know when. the work in the back is the same. It's like a continuation of that searching, and it parallels in many ways the transformation. So the transformation isn't like, okay, like, you know, one day it's like this and then boom, like, you know, there's a whole like processing, like digesting, transmutating of these ideas in various forms. There's stages, like stages of development, stages of the process, and then the like curation, like working with a curator, or even when I'm thinking about, you know, let's say like a potential like the like show mother, like what is going to communicate, you know, like this transformation in the way that I want to share it. And I knew that like at a certain point it didn't make any sense to bring these works from LA, because I don't know, like it seemed like I wasn't trusting the process, and I wanted to say I surrender to what is going to happen. And I know that I'm going to be, it's like the body of work is in process, you know, like in my own body. And so if like I can converse with primary as a space, get to know, you know, like it in this more direct relationship, then I'm going to trust what comes out, and we'll see. And it's, again, it's like sort of like I, like, you know, there were days when I'm like, I hope it's going to transform, you know, but I just need to be in it. And that doesn't mean that doesn't negate any of the work that's not seen. It's, you know, it's the paradox. Like there's like the work that's here, and then there's space for the work that's there. And in my hopes, one day they're going to be, you know, sort of like in that conversation, and it's going to be the negative space between these different works or pieces that's going to be the felt art that I'm hoping that people can experience, because that's the moment of like that transformation that's the big surprise. Like that's like the like surprising aspect. And I don't, like, as an artist, it's like, you know, I want to be surprised as well. So.
And thinking more about that kind of transformation, and maybe going back to this point that you raised kind of earlier on about this kind of this shift from the exhibition being vertical to being kind of horizontal, and how that kind of journey took place in terms of thinking. I guess I'm kind of thinking that the video existed before you arrived, and the video, you know, we talked about it as this kind of, that almost it might become like a kind of mantra, kind of playing in the background as other works are kind of made. So the video and the spoken elements of the video are continually kind of present as kind of other elements of the show are made. And there was this, you know, immediate desire not to kind of black out the space, that we didn't want the space to become this space of projected video in terms of that being, you know, the kind of sole use, and to kind of lose the kind of natural light, which is such a kind of major kind of feature of the kind of space, which then led on to that next decision around the introduction of this kind of flat screen within the space, in order to kind of compensate for the fact that the projection is not always completely visible. So on a kind of bright sunny day, you can't see the projection. You can see that there is a projection, but you can't necessarily see it kind of clearly. So this kind of introduction of this doubled kind of image within the space, and by laying that flat on the floor, that led to this kind of idea of how does that then draw a kind of a person visiting the space down the space in order to be able to see it, and what that kind of experience of looking down at the work kind of does in terms of, I guess this kind of, for me, there was always this kind of relationship between the flat screen on the floor and the kind of gravestone on the kind of floor, that kind of, you know, that kind of back and forth between that. But then also, as you were kind of developing the kind of works on paper, I guess there was not an initial intention that those would be experienced flat on the floor. They were flat on the floor because that's the way that they were made, and that's the way that they could be kind of dried and kind of stored. But I think initially there was an expectation that maybe they would be hung, whether they would be hung, you know, in the terms of the full length, or whether they would be cut into kind of individual pieces, and they would become this kind of you know, repetition around the kind of the outside of the wall. And maybe there was just something about as those kind of works on paper began to continually occupy the kind of majority of the floor space, that kind of led on to kind of thinking about how both the kind of video on the floor and the works on works on paper on the floor begin to kind of force a particular movement around the space in terms of as a kind of person kind of visiting. I don't know whether that's a fair kind of reflection on that kind of journey that it kind of went through, or whether there was something else about this kind of switch from the kind of vertical to the horizontal that was particularly important.
No, I think that's a really yeah, I love the way that you're sharing that. I think when we both recognized the like television, and I think we almost like we put the TV there almost like without really like, you know, like we're like, okay, like we're gonna put it over here in this corner and we'll see what it does. And then it's like, oh, it's doing something. And we both recognized that it was like this mirroring. And for me, yes, I thought of, you know, looking into the video, I could see like it, like the like object of the television did remind me of a gravestone, but it also reminded me of like all those moments of like a puddle, like after the rain of a gravestone, and then looking at my reflection and having like that mirroring back. And so there was like this really, what I loved about it is that there's this other, and again, going back to this idea of like mother, her, other, this like projection that's ephemeral, that changes with the light, that changes with like the sun moving through the space, and that has like a different porosity, you know, like air, for example. And then this television that to me is like both like stone and puddle and reflection and all of those things. And then once we you know, when the video is going like present and the day is kind of like further along, there's the reflection of the video on the windows in the primary gallery space. So again, there's like these moments that sort of, if I allow myself to kind of listen to what the art is sharing with me, then it's like, oh yes, like that's it, you know. And it's not something conscious, but it becomes conscious only in recognition. And I think that's, we both experienced that when we saw, you know, like there was like it didn't come from, oh, the projection is fading during the sunlit hours of the day, so let's compensate. Perhaps there's like a little bit of that logic, like, you know, but the reason why we left it there is because there was this other thing happening. And that other thing happening was what actually activated that transformation. Like it's not only like a compensation. It's almost like it's a conversation. That's the interesting part of it. And with the work laying flat and going into the sort of landscape in the video, it's not because we couldn't hang them or because the ceilings were not high enough, because actually like this place did have like really high ceilings. It's because there's something in that horizontal vastness, expansiveness of the floor extending into the video that creates like a momentum where it brings like this like process that's very like haptic and touched and almost like primal of like the rubbing and like the kid on the floor, you know, going into this perhaps this landscape. It's like
Yeah, and I guess there's something about the kind of installation that brings back that kind of idea of the kind of negative space, because in a way the whole volume of the space becomes kind of negative space, because everything is applied to kind of the surface. There's nothing that occupies the kind of the physical volume, and you also allow the existent kind of architecture to kind of remain in terms of the walls, the kind of windows, etc. So everything's about that kind of surface that kind of pulls you into those particular surface textures that are kind of changing, both kind of in duration in relation to the kind of projected kind of image, but in relation to the kind of drawings, that kind of durational aspect of how they were kind of made, which I maybe wanted to kind of touch on a little bit about. It's probably one of the elements of the work that's least visible to us in relation to kind of working with you, but also maybe, you know, an audience, in terms of there seems to be an interest in the kind of alchemical kind of properties of certain kind of materials and how they kind of interact. But they're almost kind of things that you're doing that is outside of anybody observing you doing them. So when we kind of talk about, Jade was asking me, well, what are all the kind of materials in the kind of drawings? And I was like racking my brain for all the different things that we'd kind of ordered, and then all the things that we ordered, did you use them all? So I was kind of wondering whether that interest in terms of alchemy of kind of materials is an ongoing thing in relation to your ways of working, and what it is about that kind of particularly kind of appeals to you as a way of producing these kind of surfaces.
Yeah, oh, awesome question. Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, they're actions, you know, they're actions held actions held, I don't know, like captive in the material or something. Thinking about the like comfort objects behind me, or the actions at the cemetery, or these rubbings, the hopscotch rubbings that are also figures. I mean, I think that's the reason why I started like urinating on the rubbing figures as almost like a closing action. This idea of like, you know, also like preparing the surface with oak gall dye, and then adding iron, and the addition of iron creating this almost like alchemical reaction where you know, where the iron and the oak gall materials meet, they like transform into black. So this kind of these and using like my urine to activate that as an act, like to hold that action, or an acknowledgement almost of like that action occurring, is definitely part of the work. Or even like when the feathers from the pigeons in the yard kind of flew onto the piece, just kind of like holding that, okay, like that was like this particular like moment, like how do I hold this moment, how do I hold this action, how do I, you know, yeah, like maybe it has to do with like time, like how do I hold this moment here, and like close it and open it.
I'm interested in what you did with the jacket, and the fact that you turned it inside out, you know, and all the kind of insides of the jacket came out. I'm really interested to know why you kind of decided to do that, and what did that kind of show to you?
Yeah, again, it's like the like unconscious conscious. So like, yeah, I had brought this jacket, this London fog jacket that my mother had given me, and because I thought it was going to be really cold, and we had really beautiful sunny days in Nottingham when I was there, and so it was like, okay, this jacket, there was like this impulse, or I don't know if it's instinct or thing inside me, that I'm like, okay, I'm going to make it into a comfort object. I'm going to cut it. And and I start cutting it. I didn't think that like of the fact that it had like down feathers in it. I start cutting it. These feathers start kind of like, and it's like the pigeon. I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like this I'm like the coyote eating the bird. I'm like the pigeon, the hawk eating the pigeons, like all of these things. It's like, and then just making it into this little body again, trying to contain it, and then putting the gel medium to kind of close the action, and then sprinkling, maybe I might have sprinkled like a little iron on it. And iron for me, like now is it like things become symbols after I keep repeating them. So the iron powder almost like points to like blood for me, like, or like the body, you know, like this kind of like mineral, just kind of closing action. But that jacket really showed me the bird. It like showed me, you know, like these transformations of like, it can be a jacket and it's also the bird. It's also the bird that the coyotes ate. It's also the pigeons that the hawk, well, what's that hawk that hangs out at primary? I don't know, like this specific hawk.
Is it a peregrine falcon, or is it I think it is a peregrine falcon rather than a hawk.
Yes.
There's a falcon
Yes.
in the ground.
Yeah, so it kind of showed me that. It kind of gave me the experience of being both a human and it tapped into my animal, you know?
Back to the primal instinct
Yeah.
situation. Things that are primal to us, actions or somatic kind of actions that are primal.
I thought I might kind of open it up to the kind of the wider project. So you've kind of referenced a little bit in some of your answers that the exhibition here at Primary Beloved is part of a larger kind of project, Mother. And I guess I was kind of interested to know what's kind of happening now with that project. Is what we can see in the background in the studio connected to that? What's happening for you now in terms of, I guess, kind of 2 months after kind of leaving Primary? What's going on?
Like here. So these works are they're like archetypes, I think. They're finger paintings with banana, and they're made horizontal, and I feel like they're archetypal figures that are sort of like these, you know, of the processing growing out of the sort of interior-exterior conversation. I feel like banana is a material that's filled with paradox, and paradox is something that I'm really, you know, in conversation with in terms of this idea of like mother, her, other, and from the positive affirmations, kind of also learning from that continued process. To hold things in a space where paradox is possible.
How do you mean that banana as a material is paradoxical?
Well, I feel like, you know, the like when I went to Guatemala, and I kind of also knew this a little bit before, but it was really present, this idea of like, you know, the exploitation of land, especially in like Latin America for exportation. So thinking about that and the deforestation that and also like the many lives that have been harmed by the, you know, by capitalism and colonialism in the production of the banana, and but also the banana as a clone in terms of the production of the banana fruit, and the also like the everydayness of the banana. Like I go to, you know, my supermarket and I buy bananas and I enjoy them and I eat them. And so it's like, how do I hold space for this like friendly lunchbox banana, like here in the United States, and then like also the deforestation, you know, and the clone, the fact that like the banana is I don't know, like a highly susceptible, you know, is it like an endangered fruit because there's you know, there's no biodiversity in the fruit anymore. So holding space for that as a material, and what does it mean to incorporate it in like, you know, as an artist, how do I hold the place for paradox in the work? And so that's what I mean by a material that's filled with paradox.
And also I think about green bananas and plantain for some reason. We're talking
Oh,
about
yes.
particular fruits that, you know, are grown in former colonies
Yeah.
of the British and the US or America. And I think about, you know, also, yeah, that relationship between exporting and travel and migration and diaspora and a relationship to land
Yeah.
as well. So I guess that's my reflection as well. I also think about, when I think about banana, I also think about those other forms of bananas that grow around the Caribbean and around particular parts of, not far from where you are actually, you know, based at the moment in LA. So, yeah.
And like archetypes, you know, and how archetypes as human beings, in our collective human unconscious, how these archetypes, I guess I'm coming from it from a Jungian kind of, the like Carly Jung's writings on archetypes, kind of that, like, you know, how these kind of appear in different stories and, throughout different traditions, and how they've appeared for myself in my own life personally. Again, conversing with the interior self and you know, the collective self, or like the collective unconscious, and then the, like, you know, individual, like, consciousness, and how there's, like, you know, again, like the paradox, right? Like holding space for both.
I have one question for both of you again, and that's kind of following on from my first question, which is, you know, at primary we're thinking about collective learning and what that means in practice. So I'm interested to know, again, thinking about the relationship between curator and artist, what have you learned from each other? You know, we talked about what you've learned from the work and potentially the process, but I'd be interested to understand what insights or what kind of learnings have happened over the couple of years that you've been in contact with each other and engaged in this kind of very elongated process, both online and also in person?
Is that like, Nikki, do you want to start?
I can try to start. I think I'm always, although we talk about collective learning at kind of primary, I think I'm always really bad at answering this question in terms of whether I can pin down exactly what I've kind of learned through a kind of project. I think as we kind of touched on before, I think you kind of talked about this idea of letting go of certain kind of concerns, and I think that is probably something that I struggle with in terms of, you know, getting into kind of patterns of thinking that thinks that something has to be done in a particular way. And, you know, obviously I don't think it's particular to this project, but I think working with you on this project has meant that you have to let go of certain things, that various things that developed along the kind of journey, letting go of them does not mean that they weren't kind of valid at that particular point in time, but we don't need to hold on to them in relation to what it is that we kind of share within the kind of project. So, you know, I think that was something, you know, obviously in other projects that I work on, that kind of comes up, and I guess that's part of the kind of enjoyment of being involved in process-led ways of making work, that you force yourself to not know certain things about where it is that you're going to end up. But those are quite difficult things to kind of come to terms with, I think, in terms of, you know, valuing a particular conversation or a particular idea or a particular way of thinking about making work, and then to go, actually, we're just going to let go of that whole kind of element of the project because it's no longer relevant to kind of keep hold of it, which I think happened, you know, several times within the project. So there are whole other elements of the project that we haven't talked about tonight because it maybe isn't relevant to talk about them because they're not necessarily present anymore. But yeah, I don't know whether that feels the same for you.
That's transformation, no? We've just been talking about metamorphosis, transformation, allowing things to evolve, right? Allowing things to come out, but also to disregard, or not disregard completely, but to allow that thing to maybe transform into something else, or, you know, letting go also is about transformation and change and allowing for that to happen. And also being patient with yourself, you know, like being patient with the process, being patient with the relationship, being patient with the way that, with audiences as well, visitors. yeah.
Yeah, and somehow like what was like maybe that it's all part of it. Like it does not mean that it wasn't, that it's not valued or that it was not a part of the process. I feel like I really connect with what you're saying, Nikki, because I feel like it's like very often I feel like I've learned um to um to be more comfortable, because it's still uncomfortable, but more comfortable with this idea of like letting go, like let's say like, or like more comfortable with trying to control less. and that instead of seeing mistakes as like mistakes, like not, but like seeing, or like seeing parts that we don't use as like mistakes, seeing them as, okay, well, this was part of it, and it because of this, then this kind of, there's a like a growing from, or like, but this was essential um to open up this other space. Mm, but yet valuing, like I can value it all, even though it all is not brought to the surface. um so and I also learned, something that was really wonderful. I feel like working with primary was that I've a lot of times, I don't know if this is something that you share, but it was wonderful to be able to ask for the materials that I needed, and to have them ready, like, and to have them be there, and it's like, oh wow, like I feel valued, and I feel like trusted, and there's like a momentum, like whether it's materials, whether it's time, there's like all this like everything I needed for the work to happen was being there was a generosity in that. And so there was like, okay, like it makes me feel supported, and it motivates, and it's also scary because I don't want to, like let like anyone down per se, but then it's like, wait, I want, like, we're all in this for the artwork. So it's holding that space for like, like feeling all those feelings of both like the insecurity, the not knowing, the discomfort, but then holding that space for trusting. And because I know that we're all in it for that wanting to know, that surprise, that art, I mean, there's yeah.
Shall we open up for any other kind of questions that anybody in the audience has? So at the moment there's just the one, so I'm going to read that out, and we'll see whether any more kind of pop up in the chat in kind of response. So a question that kind of came in earlier on within the kind of chat from Susie Henderson is, I'm sensing some psychic connections in your artwork. Is that an accurate observation, and does that relate to the corporality of your installation? Terrible at pronouncing that word.
Psychic connections. I feel like it's, in that surrender. And when I say surrender, I don't mean like this like sad giving up surrender. I mean like like an opening to like the unknown art, because that's greater than like what I know. Like, like there's like um I feel like it goes back to like this idea of like, yeah, like trusting and like recognizing, and that dance between trusting and recognizing, and noticing the coincidences and finding like like if they're meaningful, being able to kind of like bring those moments out and be like, oh, this is actually like, oh, this is what's interesting. And like that's how we learn, right? And like that's transformation too, because learning is sometimes like confrontational and like jarring. Learning is sometimes uncomfortable, but learning is always like, it's like there's like a like building new understanding, and it's like, oh, I didn't know that I didn't know, but now I know. I can't believe, so there's I don't know if I'm answering the question. Help me out, Nikki.
How can I help you? So I think it might relate back to that kind of point that we were talking about, the coyote and that kind of psychic connection, that kind of I guess kind of an out of body experience, or a kind of transference into another kind of object, and that experiencing things through this other kind of entity. I think that that's when it kind of popped up. I don't know whether that helps or kind of hinders the kind of question. But yeah, I can ask another question if that could.
Also, I think, it might just be about being in touch with yourself, A psychic connection is more about knowing or sensing yourself, no? Like sensing like your spiritual self, right? Something that's not necessarily corporal in the sense of a physical being, like flesh, but actually kind of like a sixth sense in a sense, like knowing, like being in touch with your instincts, being in touch with your intentions, your own intentions, and then tapping into that and allowing that to come to the surface, right? So kind of not like allowing kind of subconscious to kind of come to the surface. And maybe that's not psychic, I would say, but maybe that's just about being really in touch with yourself,
Yeah.
And that possibly also relates to, I meant to kind of ask earlier about this kind of process of listening to things as you're kind of walking, and as you're kind of thinking, that you're listening to these things. We talked about, I guess, kind of positive, I don't know whether they're called positive affirmations. That's obviously what we call the section of kind of research on the website. But this idea of things continually going on, spoken into your ear, into your head as you're kind of walking around. That there's this kind of these things going on that might also be another way of kind of having these kind of ways of kind of entering other spaces or creating other affects on your kind of mental and physical state as you're kind of undertaking the work?
Yeah, actually, and it reminds me of like the rubbing of the hopscotch too, like these actions, the walking, and I remember when I was really listening to the positive affirmations, these had like a sort of like a repetition. It's about like almost like building, like maybe like deconstructing and reconstructing patterns of thinking or access of like thoughts. Or I love what you said, Jade, about like knowing yourself. And as the work has progressed, I'm allowing myself to kind of build from that new foundation, or that new almost like a remothering of self. Yeah.
We got another question from Colette, who's kind of asking, you spoke about structures in relationships and of control. Can you speak more about your approach to working collaboratively with other creatives and people in other sectors, for example, childhood psychology?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think Nikki and I had talked about like expanding or like making the like building off the connections that the work was kind of bringing forward. And in this work, I think a lot of the interior searching has pointed me to developmental moments in my life, key developmental moments, and then in therapy, kind of working with like sort of like looking back at some of those moments and like reconstructing, and how that kind of brings like like what kind of dance that does with the material and you know, the artwork. And so I was interested in learning from others, how they, like what connections they found, or what, you know, what points of connection we could continue and grow the conversation from, to be more, to just to have a greater awareness of our common common moments, common, I don't know, like common shakes, you know, common, yeah, and like constructions, reconstructions, and deconstructions, I guess.
So we've got another question from Becky asking, can you tell us a bit about the other artworks and sculptures that remain in other parts of the building? So we didn't really talk too much about it. Obviously there was the conversation that you had around the kind of the jacket turned inside out. But maybe just talk a little bit about what is outside of the main kind of gallery space, and what the kind of significance of kind of what they are, and what the significance of them is, and why they're kind of located in those other spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I have like one version here, which is like a comfort object, and I call these comfort objects. It actually started because I would hold it to comfort like myself, and it's almost like a mothering of my younger self. Going back to the crayons, actually, kind of like having this connection between ourselves and all of our stages of process of being, so the comfort objects kind of interact in the building in different ways. They're kind of hiding. I think they're kind of hiding in the building. And at the time, I didn't really understand why. It just felt right to kind of situate them, sort of like, almost like hiding. And I've been kind of thinking and reflecting on why I've like decided to place them like that, or what kind of like how they act. And they're my inner child in a way, in like the many parts, like the part that hides, the part that this like idea of like hide and seek also, like what is that, you know? It's still a question for me, but I've been making these comfort objects. Some of them are not really to hold, but to hold maybe like a part of the self, like, you know, some are less huggable than others, but they seem to hold some aspect, either like whether it's like a feeling or an emotion. They're kind of containers for some kind of energy, psychic energy per se, or, you know, I've been thinking a lot about, in the positive affirmations, you'll see that there's like chickens, there's like eggs and chicken videos, and I have a chicken coop, and I've been thinking a lot about the chicken coop as a body, and the different hens as part of the self, the ego being a hen as well. And so like these ideas of like these fragments of like the self, and I feel like these comfort objects in a way are the first iteration of that, and then the hens are teaching me that the hens are also part of that, and then that's conversing with my process and shaping the next aspects of the work. So that's kind of what they are.
And what is happening next with the work in terms of, I think yesterday you were talking about this chicken coop, and how that's going to kind of come into play. Do you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, because I'm excited. I like, okay, so I think I'm gonna clear this space, like put like all the work maybe like in the other room. This is my house studio. And I want to do this virtual reality chicken coop where I'm able to learn and like decenter the human, right? But like learn from the chickens in relationship, and so use this space as a play space in a way with the sort of like technology, being able to inhabit this other space that's both simultaneously physical and psychological. I think so. I'm kind of going into this idea of like thinking about like the coop as a body, exactly, like, and then like the hens as different aspects of the body, and kind of expanding, like breathing from there, right? And then that's going to shape like the sculptural work that's going to come next, and in a way like this virtual work I think of as, I don't really define like sculpture, virtual. It's like all like it's art. So like, the material will take form in whatever form it needs to communicate the searching process.
Okay, I can't see any more questions in the chat, so shall we start to wrap things up perhaps? Are there any kind of final thoughts from you, Jade? Anything you want to kind of bring in?
I feel like I've been witnessing the process, and there's something that brings to that in terms of just seeing how generative and how warm the relationship is that you have with Nikki and Primary. But also there's a gratitude there, a consistent gratitude for, as you were talking about, the materials, the ability to play, And we take that for granted, play and experimentation, and actually being able to do that in a space which is judgmental free, which is about giving agency to the artist, or giving a sense of autonomy to the artist to kind of produce in a way that's fluid, in a way that kind of might be to and fro, or might be kind of haptic or sporadic, or and it's really been beautiful to seeing the process really at Primary. And I know Becky's kind of also mentioned that as well in the chat about just kind of seeing that kind of emerge in the building and interacting with that. And I think there's something really nice about, just the relationship between LA and the UK, and how that's formed really naturally and organically. I think that's like really rare, it's like a really rare thing to get in the sector, and a really great opportunity actually to kind of be able to maybe explore different modes of practice or different ways of approaching a project that time might allow. Usually, like, time doesn't allow for that, and space. But I think there's been a lot of both space and time to be patient with the process. So I think that's my last thought,
And there is one more question that's just kind of popped up in the chat. So just to ask this final question, can you speak more about the importance of holding space and what art affords you as an individual needing space for, or access to art, to articulate things or feelings that also exist outside of practice? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. For me, there's not a lot of like art and life are very interconnected for me. So working on, let's say, like we're working on just trying to connect to different parts and aspects of myself, whether spiritual or you know, like working on towards my wholeness in general is also is directly connected to working on art as it's not like a separate thing. But I think of myself in terms of like as an artist as like really holding space for art, in trusting that what like art can do, like which is something that I can't really like it's sometimes it's like nonverbal. It's a trust that there's something that art does that's closer to philosophy and spirituality and all of these things, but it's like a channeling. I feel like there's and it happens in relationship to others. But it might not be like able to be written about exactly. Like you can't write about like a beautiful statement and have it do what the art does per se, or what I'd like the art to do. It's like holding space for like that thing to happen, like that it's, again, it goes back to the negative space perhaps, the unknown, the surprise, the serendipity, the play, holding space for thinking play, like serious play, I think, like not serious play. This is like, for me, like very, very like essential. And it's something that I can't like really control because it's absorbed through through others, through sensing and through like reflection. So that's what I try to hold space for. I don't know if I answered the question, but
I think let's hold on to this kind of idea of serious play, which I quite like as a kind of phrase, in terms of what that means. So I think it's probably time to kind of wrap things up in terms of there not being any more kind of questions in the chat. So it probably just leaves me to kind of thank everybody involved. So obviously, first of all, Carmen, thanks a lot for everything along the kind of the past kind of 3 years, but taking part in the conversation this evening and kind of offering that kind of insight into the kind of processes of making work and what's going on for you in terms of that kind of journey. Thanks, Jade, for I guess kind of prompting this kind of conversation, which kind of came about in a conversation that you had with Carmen. But also for taking part in the kind of conversation. Obviously, everybody that's joined us via YouTube tonight. And finally, to thank Jim and Reese and Tom and Colette, who are kind of making it all kind of work in the kind of background. So yeah, that's everybody. Good night and see you next time.
thank you so much. Bye.